Welcome to Smile Designer Pro. In this video, you'll learn how to set up your first case, create your smile design, and then how to turn that smile design into a realistic simulation that you can share with your patients and get them excited about the transformation. We really recommend you play this video on one screen while working along with the same sample case on another screen. The first screen you see when you log into Smile Designer Pro is your case gallery. As you can see, it's completely empty, and we have a suggestion here to start with a sample case. So let's do that. And the sample case that we're going to work through in this video is Rebecca. It's the third one on the list. So we click on that and select Photos Only. It's going to download all the assets for this case and bring us to the patient information screen. So at any time when you want to navigate to a different step, at the top left of the screen, you'll see this little icon, and that brings up our navigation menu. If we want to go back to the case gallery, we can simply click on the case gallery link here and go back. And this will take us through all the different steps in our workflow. And there's also a settings page where you can make some adjustments to the interface. So as you can see, we have some basic information that's already filled in for us. Things like the patient first name, last name, their concerns, if you want to enter them. These things are optional, and if you prefer to identify your patient using just a generic number, you can enter that in as well. Each of the case photos is represented by one of these little boxes, and when you click on a box, you'll get a file browser on the desktop versions of Smile Designer and a photo library pop-up on the mobile versions. So you can bring in pictures from Dropbox, or you can take pictures directly with your iPad or Android tablet. Smile Designer Pro also has support for intraoral scan files that you can match up with the photo. That's a more advanced workflow, and we'll cover that in a separate video. The basic photos that you need for Smile Designer Pro are really the frontal smiling picture, and if you have one, a full face retracted picture that you can match up. So you can use these two pictures together to do your treatment planning. And certainly if you want to get into more advanced planning with different photo views, Smile Designer Pro does support that. But in this video, we're going to focus on the frontal view and how to sort of do the work to create a quick simulation to show the patient. So once we've imported our pictures and entered our patient information, we click on the next button. Now, as you saw, as soon as we arrived at this face setup step, the software detected some features on the patient's face and brought in some lines to show us where it detected the features. You don't need to worry about these lines being exact. The software basically uses some information about the face to speed up the workflow and get things set up so that you just need to make minor adjustments. So the purpose of this step is basically just to straighten the patient photo to make sure that our horizon line is correct and that we can see any canting in the smile that we want to adjust for. So as you see, we have a line going through the pupils, and we have a line for the lip commissures. And on the bottom here, we have a rotation slider that lets us adjust the rotation of the photo manually. So I can also click on these rotation buttons to adjust it by smaller steps. So typically the software will just figure out how to rotate the face so it's straight, and you probably won't need to do anything in this step. So basically, if you're happy with the orientation of the photo, then you click next. Now this step allows you to match up the retracted picture and the natural smiling picture. We recommend taking full face retracted pictures together with the smiling pictures in order for them to match up. The way to do that is basically you have the patient holding the retractors themselves, and whoever's taking the photo basically take the retracted picture, and without lowering the camera to check the viewfinder, you instruct the patient to slowly take out the retractors without moving her head and give a nice smile, and then you click the shutter a second time to take the smiling picture. So if you didn't move the camera in between the retracted picture and the smiling picture, and the patient's head didn't move either, then they're going to match up really nicely. and the way to tell the software how to match them up is basically using this line. So there are instructions on the bottom here that basically tell us to position the two ends of this line on 2 points that we know are also visible in the smiling picture. So in this case, I've picked these 2 points. And once I've done that, I click on the checkmark button. And now it instructs us to position the line again at the same 2 points on the smiling picture. Once I've done that, I can use this slider to check how well the two things fit together. And in fact, if I leave the slider sort of halfway, I can move the retracted picture while being able to see sort of a ghosted version of the two things together. So this helps us to get the two things to match up really nicely. And then we can use the slider to make sure that we're happy with it. So it looks pretty good to me. And once we've done that, we click the check mark to continue to the next step. So now we're at the editor step, and as you see, the auto assist function basically brings in some teeth and gives us an initial guess about where they might go and where the midline might be. So our job here is basically to use this guide, this proportion guide together with a lip curve guide, to position these teeth as close as possible so that we can then adjust them one by one. So there's a specific order that you can follow here to make this very easy, and it goes like this. So first we decide where should the midline be. So let's say we put the midline here. And next we use this handle to move the whole set of teeth up and down. So now we decide where do we want the incisal edge position of our centrals to be. So I'm going to put it somewhere like here. Next we use these handles to adjust the width of all the teeth together. So they're sort of resized in proportion, but we're mainly focusing on the centrals here. So the idea is that we set up our centrals and then the other teeth will follow from there. So maybe I'll shift them up a little bit more, make little adjustments. Now these handles, the outer ones, adjust the vertical dimension of how the teeth recede in the mouth. So I'm going to adjust this, move them a little bit lower. Now this handle adjusts the proportion of just the centrals, so everything else is kind of moving up and down, but it's not getting stretched. So you want your centrals to be somewhere between 75 and 90. And when I'm happy with that, I click the checkmark button. And what happens after I click the checkmark button is that the guide is locked, so all these handles are going to disappear, and then the teeth will become unlocked so I can adjust them individually. So now as you see, the handles went away and the teeth are available for me to click on. So if you click on a tooth on the line itself, the tooth becomes selected. And if I click on empty space and then drag a box that crosses over one or more teeth, that's how I select multiple teeth. So if I wanted to adjust all the teeth together, I would drag a box to select them all together and then release. And now I get this transform box. So if I grab one of the edge handles, like this one, I can stretch the teeth in that direction. If I drag a corner handle, it's going to resize the teeth while maintaining the proportion. And you'll notice that the guide is now fixed. It's there as a reference for us, but it doesn't move anymore. We're just adjusting the teeth to be whatever we want them to be, whether we follow the guide or not. And my work here is basically to make these little adjustments to each tooth to get the smile design that I want. Now, I'm not a dentist, so my smile design is obviously not going to be the same as what you would do for this patient. And every design you create will be unique, and the software doesn't know about dentistry, so it doesn't know what treatments are actually required in order to achieve the aesthetic target that you're designing. So it's up to you to design a treatment plan that actually fits with the particular patient's needs. Sometimes you might want to follow the gum, sometimes you want to involve crown lengthening, gum surgery. This is all part of the thinking process when you're using this software. If you're just creating a quick simulation, you might not think about it too much. And then if the patient is actually interested in doing some cosmetic treatment, you might go deeper into the treatment planning and collaborate with your team on what is actually achievable for this patient. So it's as much a tool for selling a treatment plan as it is a tool for thinking about the case and what is it that you're actually going to do. So in this case, I want to have a more symmetric design to the teeth, and since I set them up nicely on one side, I can basically delete the teeth on this side, and the way I do that is I select these 3 teeth, and you'll notice on the left side of the screen are my tools. So initially we're in the select tool, and select really means select and edit, and next to the tool are a bunch of actions that become available when I have something selected. So when I have these 3 teeth selected, I'm going to click delete to get rid of them. Then I'm going to select the 3 teeth on the opposing side, and I'm going to click mirror. So that creates a copy and mirrors it across the midline to where we want it to be. And of course, if we wanted to make little adjustments, we can do that, or we can leave it as is. So there are other things you can do to customize the tooth forms. For instance, if I have a tooth selected, I might click on edit points, and I could really recontour the tooth point by point. And when I'm done doing that, I click on the checkmark button to switch it back to this transform box. Most of the work you'll do involves pushing and pulling and stretching these teeth using this control. But in some cases, you might want to customize sort of the edge of a tooth and how rounded or flat it is. So for that, edit points is great. You'll notice on the left side there's also a tooth contours button. So this gives you access to libraries of teeth, and you can in fact bring in some lower teeth as well. So if you want to create a patient's smile that has a different character to it, you can basically go through this, select a different template, and then adjust it to match. So if we brought in some teeth and we would adjust the length here, but we can also undo that to go back to the form that we started with, which is the one I prefer for this case. You'll notice here are the undo, redo buttons on the bottom bar here. In the bottom middle are zoom controls. So to zoom the view in and out, you can either use this bar and drag it in and out. You can use these magnifier buttons to zoom in slowly. This button will basically zoom the view to fit the patient's face on the screen. On the Mac version, if you're working with a trackpad, you would use 2-finger drag up and down to zoom in and out, and then 2-finger click and drag to pan the view around. If you're on Windows, you could use right mouse button click and drag to pan the view around, and the mouse wheel to zoom in. And also there are key combinations like Command or Shift or Control up and down, depending on what platform you're on. So there are many ways of zooming in and out and navigating the view, depending on what platform you're on. And of course, if you're on a tablet, then you would use 2 fingers to pinch and zoom and move the view around like you would in any other app. Now on the bottom of the screen here, we have our patient photos, and if I click on each one, it'll change the view. So you'll notice the design that we've created for the smiling picture is still there when we switch to the retracted view. And this is great because we can incorporate the information we see in the retracted view, like where the gums are, and do our treatment planning in this view, but then when we want to create our simulation, we would switch back to the smiling picture and go ahead and create the simulation. Now on the right side of the screen, we have our layers. So initially, we only have these 3 layers: our patient photo, our design, and our guide. And you'll notice a little lock icon indicates that the guide is visible but locked. And as I click on these, they cycle through their various states. So now the guide is hidden. If I click again, it comes back unlocked and I can adjust it. But the teeth, because I've moved the teeth and made changes, moving the guide now is not going to affect the teeth. I'm going to have to lock the guide after I make any changes and then adjust the teeth individually. And that's so that you don't actually lose any changes that you've made to the teeth just by accidentally kind of unlocking the guide and moving it again. So since I'm happy with my design, I'm going to leave the guide off at this point. And you'll notice the design I can toggle on and off, the picture I can toggle on and off as well. And as I add more things to our design, more of these layers will show up that we'll be able to toggle on and off. So now we've basically done our design, and there are other tools for more advanced things that we'll cover in a separate video that allow you to basically draw a tooth from scratch, which might be easier in some cases if you're just doing crown lengthening or other things like that. There's a shape tool that allows you to add shapes to the design that are not teeth. So anything from a straight line to a curve to freehand sketching on a tablet. There's a measure tool, which we'll cover also in a separate video, which you may or may not be interested in having sort of calibrated measurements added to your design. And finally, there's the simulation tool. So now that we've created our smile design, we're ready to turn this into a realistic simulation that we can show the patient, sort of a before and after, and get them excited about this proposed transformation. So to get started with the simulation, I basically just click on the simulation tool. Now the first time I activate the simulation tool, you'll notice the teeth got filled in. The color you don't need to worry about. It's not necessarily going to be the correct color, but it's just filling in the teeth with something so that we can do the work of marking off the lip line. So the first time we activate the simulation tool, we need to mark off the lip area in order to tell the software how to cut the teeth so they look like they're inside the mouth. And you'll notice if I click and hold on one of these points, I get a nice big magnifier. So I'm just going to go through and follow the lip. And this is the inner lip line. So our simulation teeth actually look like they're inside the mouth. It's very, very simple. If I want to add more detail to the line, I simply click on an empty part of the line and it'll add a control dot there, and then I can move it around. And if I add too many, I can basically just click and release on a dot and it'll get rid of it. Now on the bottom of the screen here, we have our mouth shadow effect. So if I adjust that, you'll see that all these orange dots are temporarily hidden from view. And that helps us to kind of see that we've marked the lip area correctly and that the teeth are getting cut nicely to the line. So again, we don't worry about the material. The centrals aren't correct, but we'll fix that in a moment. We click on the checkmark button when we're happy with our lip mask. And now we're in the simulation tool, and you'll see some instructions on the top left there. And you'll also notice that a new layer has been created on the right side here, which is the lip mask. So if you ever make a mistake and you accidentally accept the lip mask, but you're not happy with it, it works the same way as the guide. So if we click on it once, it has a mode where it's cutting the inside of the mouth, but it's filling it in with black. Another one where it's completely hidden, so it's not hiding the simulation teeth, and you see that's why they're sticking out above our lip. Another one where we can edit the lip mask, so if we've made a mistake, we can go back and fix it up. And then when we click on it one more time, it's visible, locked, and we see our simulation teeth the way we would want them. So while we're in the simulation tool, let's go back there, and now we can select the teeth and see something different, right? So when you're in the select tool and you select the tooth, these control handles have the sort of turquoise color. When we're in the simulation tool and we select the tooth, the handles are orange, and that lets us know that we're actually adjusting something different. When we're in the select tool, we're adjusting the tooth form itself. But when we're in the simulation tool, what we're doing is we're actually adjusting a picture that's inside of the tooth. And as you'll see, the app initially didn't set the size of these centrals correctly, and that's why it looked all blown out of proportion, but it's a good example of what's going on. So as I move this picture around, you'll see the simulation is actually a very simple trick. It's taking a picture of a tooth and it's cutting it to the shape that we designed. And to make this easier to see, we can activate our design layer, so the lines that we designed earlier. And you'll see that next to the line layer, there's also an icon for the simulation. So we can always switch back to the lines, or we can fill them in with the simulation material. Now, while we're in the simulation tool, we basically need to make sure that this doesn't happen. So we don't want the picture to be smaller than the line, because then it's not actually simulating the form that we designed for the patient. And we don't want it to be too stretched out because, as you saw earlier, it completely makes it look unrealistic and flat. So this is a situation where you want to just basically have this touching the edge, and that'll give us the realistic appearance to the teeth. So once we've done that for each one of these teeth, and you'll see that the software basically tries to do as good a job as it can matching these things, but it doesn't always get it perfect. So you'll need to understand how the simulation tool works in order to fix a problem where the tooth is not getting completely cut or it's too flat. So we just make this minor adjustment for each tooth. And then we switch the lines off. And one thing you'll notice is that the patient's own teeth are sticking out underneath the simulation. So in the case where we're reducing the length of the teeth, then we have a problem where the patient's own teeth are getting in the way and we're not really seeing the true simulation of what we want to do. So to fix that, we have our smudge tool. And you'll notice that when we're in the simulation tool, there are these three icons along the left side here: select material, whitening, and smudge. So we're going to use the smudge tool, and it's basically a brush that lets you drag pixels in the patient photo underneath our simulation teeth. So I'm going to set the brush size a little bit bigger, and what I need to do is basically click and drag starting from the edge where the patient's own tooth ends, and then drag it up and behind our simulation teeth. So I can do that on the gingival side, and I can do it on the incisal edges as well. And all I need to do is these short strokes where I'm dragging the color up and behind. And we have to be careful not to accidentally drag color of anything that is tooth. So if you're doing a case that you know is going to be a reduction case, you'll want to have the patient smiling with the teeth slightly apart, because if the bite is closed when you're taking the picture, you end up doing something like that, which doesn't look good. So you need some color from the inside of the mouth or the tongue in order to use the smudge tool successfully. And one thing to note is if you do accidentally create a smudge stroke that you don't like, you should undo it instead of trying to fix it with more smudging. But as long as you have a little bit of color from the inside of the mouth, you can drag that color and use it anywhere. So even if I only had a little bit over here, I could drag it all the way across if I needed to and create that color behind even the centrals. So in this case, I don't need to do that, but we've gotten the patient's teeth out of the way. And maybe I'll do a little bit more here. And when we're happy with that, we click on the checkmark button. And now we're back in the regular simulation tool. Now, if you want to see what's actually going on with the smudges, you can select the select tool, and we can grab the teeth that we've created here and just temporarily move them up out of the way, and you'll see what the smudge tool actually did. So it pushed the pixels around, but because our simulation teeth are on top of that, all that mess is basically hidden under our simulation teeth, and that's how we reduce the length. So it's a very simple trick, but it helps you to kind of keep the focus on the new forms of the teeth without having the patient's existing dentition in the way. So let's switch back to the simulation tool, and we can deal a little bit with the shade. So let's click on whitening, and our whitening controls basically allow you to affect all the teeth that we've created together. So we can adjust how yellow they are. We can leave them more natural looking or whiter. So this is the most extreme white we can do. And we can also adjust how shiny the teeth are. So if I dial it all the way down, the teeth are pretty flat in appearance. So if you took a picture with a cell phone, for example, you might want to dial the highlights way down in order to actually match the lighting of the photo. But in this case, this photo was taken with a DSLR, so we'll want as many of the highlights as we can get. And finally, we can adjust the overall exposure to match the conditions in the photo. Another thing to notice is if I select a tooth while I'm in this whitening mode, I can adjust the exposure on just that tooth. So if I want to darken the posterior teeth individually, I can do that by selecting them and then reducing the exposure on just those teeth. So in many cases, this will help you achieve more depth and match the lighting in the photo. So we don't want to go too dark, we don't want to go too bright. It's basically an aesthetic choice. And you'll notice that the material that the teeth are filled in with is sort of like a denture material that Smile Designer starts you off with. So if I toggle the simulation off and on, you can see it's already a pretty dramatic transformation. And you might want to stop there if the patient is edentulous or their teeth are in really bad shape. But in cases where the patient's existing teeth are pretty good in terms of using the color, we can create a much more realistic simulation using the patient photo as the material for our simulation. The way to do that is by clicking on Select Material while we're in the Simulation tool. So we're in our Simulation tool and we click Select Material. And in this pop-up, you'll see that we started with the SDP material and we want to switch it to the patient photo's natural smile. When I hit apply, it almost looks like the teeth disappeared. But what's actually happening is that each tooth is now filled in with a copy of the patient's own picture. So our goal here is pretty much the same. We want to make the picture in each tooth bigger in order to fill it with tooth color. And in this case, I don't like that little notch. I want to get rid of it. So I'm actually going to use the color from the other central here. And now I'm just going tooth by tooth and making the picture bigger so that tooth color fills the shape that we designed. Now it's a little confusing because we have the whole patient photo in here. So we need to basically distort and stretch the patient photo until the tooth that we're interested in is big enough that it fills our contour. Now if one tooth is discolored and we don't want to use the color of that tooth, we drag this picture across to use the color from a neighboring tooth. So in this way, we can basically deal with one tooth that's off in order to create a much more natural simulation. This is always going to be your best option if the patient's teeth are in good enough shape. And that's because the color that you're using is color that comes from the photo itself and the lighting conditions in which the photo was taken. So once we've done that and positioned the material for each tooth, we can go back to whitening and we can still apply some whitening and do some exposure adjustments if we want. But you'll notice that when we use the patient photo as our material source, we get a much more natural result. And we can still do these little brightness adjustments. So if I want to make this lateral just a little bit brighter, or this one just a little bit darker, I can do that. And we can toggle it off and on. So whenever it's possible, we highly recommend using the patient photo for the most realistic simulation. But it depends on the case. So in some cases, you might want to use that denture material. In some cases, you might want to use the patient teeth. But that's pretty much it. So now we have our before and after. Even when the teeth are filled in with color, we can go back to the select tool and select the teeth, and make adjustments. So this is something that you can change chairside with the patient's feedback if they say that the teeth are too long or too short. These are things that you can adjust to incorporate their feedback. And when we're ready to save out a picture, we would go to the export step. And in the export step, we have this white box, and everything inside the white box corresponds to the picture that will actually get saved out. So you'll notice there's a view. I can zoom it in and out to get it set up exactly how I want to save out the picture. In the top left corner, there's a layer pop-up, so I can actually decide what content to show in this panel. So I can switch things off and on. And on the bottom here, I have my layouts. So typically you'll want to do a side-by-side before and after, and that's this button. So I click on that, and the software already guesses that since you're doing a side-by-side, that you'll want to have just the photo on one side and our simulation on the other side. If you want to make any adjustments, again, you have these layer pop-ups on each side, so you can click on it and you can control what content is visible on each side, which will be included in our saved picture. Now there are other buttons that let you control the proportion. So if you're saving something for Instagram, you might want to save out a square, or if you're incorporating it in a Keynote PowerPoint presentation, you might want to use some different aspect ratios to match your slides. Down here on the bottom right, you can choose JPEG or PNG, as well as the picture size you're looking for. And when you've got everything set up the way you want, you hit the Save button, and on the desktop you'll get a file browser, and on the iPad you'll basically be able to save it either to Dropbox or to your photo library. So this concludes our basic introduction. In other videos we'll get into more in-depth treatment planning and go through more advanced features of how you can take your smile design and actually integrate it into a fully digital workflow. But before we say goodbye, we're going to go through this whole case start to finish without talking, just so you can see how fast it is to use once you get comfortable with it. So let's do that. And that's it. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for a lot more from Smile Designer Pro.